In today's video, we're going to talk about taking your manuals to the next level. And of course, I've got our in-house trained manual monkey, former manual world champion, Chris Smith. Help me out.
Yeah, how's it going? So today we're going to be taking a look at using those manuals out on the trail, back wheel through everything, maybe a bit of front wheel added in, but there's going to be a load of back wheel loving.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
First one, Chris, I reckon it's good fun, this one. Bit of a challenge, manualing through rollers. What are your top tips?
I think using that first roller to get that front wheel high is definitely key on this, as well as just focusing on the last roller that you want to get to. I think that's really important, keep that focus locked in, and just really using your arms and your legs to pump through those rollers, and just be aware that each of those rollers is going to want to pull that front wheel down. So as you get to that next rise, keep that front wheel high.
I guess once you G out at the bottom, everything's going to want to drop.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of two ways doing this. The one I prefer is going fast and kind of holding a lower manual, but then in the bottoms pumping my legs through.
Yeah, definitely.
Or maybe you could just get up and sort of ride a slower manual all the way through. I think that's kind of hard, that.
Yeah, I think it's slower is probably a little bit harder actually, but I think it's really important as well to think about what bike you're doing it on. I think manualing a hardtail for a set of rollers is definitely very different to a full suspension bike. With a full suspension bike, particularly in the bottom of those rollers, you get that suspension compress, and again, really wants to pull the bike down, doesn't it?
You've got to try and sort of predict how much your bike's going to squash in the bottom, I suppose.
Exactly, yeah.
Without looping out. All right, I'll have a go. I'm a bit disappointed in my first attempt, just warming up, so.
Yeah, I'll maybe have a go at that slow style as well. Let's give it a go.
Nice. Doing some pretty advanced manualing skills today, I guess, Chris, but what would be your biggest piece of advice to someone who's learning to nail their first manuals?
Nailing that first manual, well, there's quite a few mistakes you can make, but I think one of the main ones is that basically you need to understand that the rear axle is the pivoting point of that, and your weight really needs to be down low and around that area. If you're in front of that and high above the bike, is never going to happen. You really need to get sort of behind, and I kind of feel like you almost fall back into a manual. You're not picking the bars up, you're almost falling back into it. And I like to pull with my arms backwards, not up. We're sort of pulling back, but pushing forward and dropping your heels and sort of pushing the bike whilst pulling it with the handlebars.
Yeah, so getting your weight low to the back wheel.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, next advanced manual skill. We're going to do a nose manual over the top of the table into a manual on the backside, Chris.
So two manuals in one. We're going on that front wheel. I think it's quite a natural thing, isn't it? As that back wheel drops in, you sort of catch your weight backwards, and it almost sort of happens automatically, doesn't it?
I think it feels more natural to land in a manual from a nose manual than it is to just drop into the back.
Yeah, I think you just got to go super careful when you load that front wheel up that you don't pop too much. I've seen a few riders go over the bars going into this, so don't get too carried away, and just land manual away. Should we give it a go?
All right, let's do it. Right, made two mistakes last couple of goes actually. So first one, I went too high into a nose manual and I couldn't get it back the other way. And that time I sort of went too early, so did the nose manual good. Then I went to manual too early and I sort of caught my back wheel on the knuckle, and then it just kills the manual straight away. So it's kind of hard, you got to get the weight right, but also the timing so you land nicely on your back wheel just as you come into that downslope.
Neil, it looks like you got that nose wheelie to manual pretty dialed. Come on, what's the tips for doing it?
A couple of good ones. I think the first thing is you got to make sure you're comfortable with the nose wheelie first. which I think is actually pretty easy. You just got to used to throwing the weight forward. Like kind of throwing the bike forward more than the weight.
You're not using a brake, are you, at all?
No. I do remember the days, who was the guy who used to use the front brake to do front flips?
Jim DeChamp.
Jim DeChamp.
Yeah.
For that always seemed a bit sketchy. I'm not using my front brake and it's just like literally throwing the front wheel down and then it's just getting the time in. I got it wrong a couple of times. If you kind of then case your back wheel almost, it just kills the manual straight away.
Yeah.
So you've got to think of the jump in two bits really, a top and then the downslope. So nose wheelie, manual.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing to add, I think just catching that compression as well at the bottom is quite hard as well on a full suspension bike. Really G out, don't you, when you go from front to back and then that back wheel hits the flat of the track. That's when you really got to pull again. I think it's like 2 pulls, isn't it?
You're almost behind the balance point so that when you hit that, it brings it back.
Nice. Okay, so next on the list is going to be the lanel. Now this, as the name suggests, is where you jump a jump and land in a manual, hence the lanel. So let's break it down and show you guys how we're going to do it. Okay, so for the lanel, the main point of this is keeping that front wheel nice and high. So you keep the front wheel high and land in that manual position. So you really need to push forward with your legs and cover that rear brake, but just try and keep that front wheel nice and high and absorb that shock. And that should hopefully keep that manual going down the trail. Yeah,
it's kind of same as a nose manual. You're trying to end up in the same position, but you're more committed, obviously, to jumping.
Yeah.
I think one of the important things here is try and land as smooth as you can. If you land heavy, it's going to drop the front wheel straight away. So you've got to try and maybe go a little bit lower if you can, but get over the knuckle, land smooth, and then ride it out.
Yeah, and I think another point to add to that is to actually, maybe you need to land exactly on that balance point, or even, I think, slightly more like over-rotated, so you catch, so you actually fall into the manual position. I think, as you mentioned, if you're going too low, it's almost impossible to bring that front end of the bike up. But if you go for slightly more, you'll actually fall to that right position, let off the brake, push forward, and it should carry that speed. Pretty sketchy one, but have a go, Don. Come on, you got it.
Oh man, it's actually pretty scary.
It is, isn't it?
It's been a while. I did some on the smaller one up there, it's easier. This is like, it's fast. I've actually forgotten my gloves today and it's quite hot. I've got sweaty hands. And this is one where it feels like if I land heavy, it's unlikely that the grips can come out of my hands, but it does feel a bit like worrying.
Definitely a big pull on the bars, isn't it, to keep
and then
it in
I'm
there.
like just like on that back brake. If I need to, I'm just hitting it and aborting the manual and dropping that front tyre. But
it is quite a full-on manoeuvre. I think there's a lot of commitment going on, isn't there? I mean, to land in that position and be off for that back brake initially to let it go is quite a big commitment, isn't it?
I've done a couple where I've landed in it, but it doesn't feel good because you've got a roller here. It'll feel good if I get all the way to that.
Yeah, and I think again that compression at the bottom where it goes to flat bottom is really, you know, on a full suspension bike like yours is really gonna, you got to overemphasize that balance point and get that weight back even more and lay off that brake. So say it's a hell of a lot of commitment in one jump.
I'm trying again.
Get it, you got it to the roller. So for today's video, you might notice that I'm not actually doing too much riding, just putting my words of wisdom to this video. It's because I got a really bad back at the minute. Kind of put my back and my hip out, so I can't really ride too much, but there's a load of manuals that I have done to show you that I still can do it and I'm not getting too old. Just that back and hip is giving me a load of grief, so just chat from me pretty much today.
Not exactly nailing it quite as I'd like, Chris, but it's something to practice on. That time, actually, I hit the back brake. You can see the skid mark. I was in the air. I was like, oh, this feels a bit high. And the back brake in the air. So the worst thing probably is looping out on the landing. Yeah,
for sure. And I think the jump that you actually choose to do the lanel on is really key too. Like this is a pretty sizable jump, so you definitely have to be on it. And the landing, well, it's got a few little holes and a few rocks. So ideally, I think the smoother you can find to land, you know, a perfect transition, like a skate park, for example, becomes a bit easier. But to do it on a natural jump does take some.
I think you're being generous, but the one thing that scares me about this one is how fast you're landing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I'm erring on the side of caution with this one. But definitely go out there, give this a go. I think manualing is one of the most fun things you can do.
Definitely.
I'm sure you agree, Chris.
Yeah, and it's a skill you can practice literally anywhere out the front of your house or in the middle of the woods, you know, it's a good one, isn't it?
You never know, one day you might be a world champion manual artist like this man over here. Give us a thumbs up if you love doing wheelies and manuals on your bike.